Good evening and welcome to our program tonight featuring Dr. Max Eisen, Holocaust survivor, author, and inspirational speaker, brought to you by the Ajax Public Library. I'm Julia Campbell, the Adult Services Librarian at the Ajax Public Library. Joining me from the library this evening are Andrew Burley, Community Engagement Associate, and Sarah Dodge, Coordinator of Community Engagement. We bring you this program to recognize International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is tomorrow on January the 27th. We are so pleased that everyone could join us for this important event. If you experience technical difficulties tonight, we recommend that you exit the program and re-enter. If you continue to have difficulties, please place a comment in the chat feature and a staff member will assist you. For our phone participants, please press *9 to request assistance. This event is being recorded and will be posted on our library website for follow-up viewing. To this end, we will be turning off your webcams, voice, and phone so that you are not displayed in the recording. Our format for this evening will begin with Dr. Eisen's presentation from 7 to 7:45 and will be followed by a Q&A portion where your questions will be answered for the last 15 minutes. If you have any questions throughout the program, please enter them into the chat, and phone participants, please press *9. Questions will be addressed following the presentation. If your question is not addressed during the program, we will follow up with you at a later date. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Max Eisen tonight, survivor of death in concentration camps. Max was born in Moldova, Czechoslovakia in 1929, and in 1944, when he was just 15 years old, his family was deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where most of them were immediately murdered in gas chambers. Max, his father and uncle worked as slave laborers, but 2 months later, his father and uncle were selected out for experiments, never to be seen again. Max managed to survive the death march in January of 1945 and was liberated by the American 761st Black Panther Tank Battalion on May the 6th, 1945. He returned to Czechoslovakia, where he spent 3 years in an orphanage. Max arrived at Quebec City in October 1949 and eventually settled in Toronto, where he has lived since. Max's book, By Chance Alone, was published in 2016 by HarperCollins, and it was a finalist for the RBC Taylor Prize for Nonfiction in 2016, and it won Canada Reads in 2019. I just finished the book and I highly recommend it to everyone. I could hardly put it down. It was such an incredible story and just so gripping. We have copies to borrow at the library, and it is also available for purchase at your local bookstore. Max has received many honorary doctorates, most recently from the Law Society of Ontario in November of 2020. In his final conversation with his father at Auschwitz, before his father's execution, Max's father spoke these words: "If you survive, you must tell the world what happened here." For more than 30 years, Max has been a speaker and educator, sharing his remarkable true story of courage and survival. And without further ado, it is my privilege to introduce Dr. Max Eisen to share his story with all of us tonight. Welcome, Max.
Thank you, Julia. Good evening, everybody. This death march that you mentioned, it was 76 years ago. I arrived from Auschwitz with about 30,000 of us left Auschwitz, prodded by SS units with their attack dogs. We walked for 4 days and nights nonstop in snow and bitter cold, exposed to the elements. 4 days and nights of walking, and then in open flat cars. We arrived in Mauthausen, Austria. This journey lasted for 13 days from January the 12th to January the 25th, 1945. I would have never thought that I would make it, that I would stay alive. Never would I have thought that I would be here speaking to all of you, and that I would be able to come to Canada one day. So it all started with words. Nazi ideology was that anyone with racial features, anyone with different beliefs who did not fit in the mold of the master race was to be simply eliminated. So they had this powerful ideology. They had a massive apparatus of deception. They had a ministry of propaganda, and they used that propaganda nonstop against the Jewish people. Nazi Germany, they had a population of approximately 60 million people, and amongst them lived 500,000 Jews, shade over a half of 1%. And they said that German Jews were more German than Germans themselves. Jews fought in the First World War with the highest decoration per capita, the most decorated soldiers and officers. And the Nazis came out, when Hitler came to power in 1933, by 1935, they came out with racial laws against Jews. This was a systematic removal of Jewish people from everyday life. They boycotted Jewish stores. The brown shirts of the SS. Here is Dr. Goebbels. He was the minister of propaganda. He said that this loudspeaker, that he had a microphone. He called it a sophisticated machine. And this propaganda was blaring 24/7. They had a hate sheet called the Stürmer, the fighter, and the apparatus of deception. And the German Jews came under the heel of the Nazis, so they were boycotted. And this is what a boycott looked like. Every little Jewish store, there were SS soldiers standing there, do not buy from Jews, or they painted the same message on plate glass windows. Jews were removed from everyday life. They couldn't sit on a park bench unless it was marked for Jews. Jewish kids could not attend school. Jewish teachers or professors could not teach in universities. They were simply pariahs. And then they were divested of all their worldly possessions, their bank accounts, their businesses. They were not confiscated for any of this. And sanctions, they were taken to some camps, at first in Germany, to Buchenwald, Dachau, Sachsenhausen. So I call it the BDS movement, which is so prevalent today. It's a hate. It's anti-Semitism coming right out of the handbook of Dr. Goebbels. It's being used today against Israel, a democratic country. It's called the BDS movement. So remembering the deception the Nazis used, you see, they didn't tell the Jews in Europe that they're going to take them to the east to occupy Poland and kill them by gas. They said they are going to be resettled in the east. So boycott means excommunication, expulsion, and extermination. This is what it means. It's a it's a huge threat for us and for our own society. And this is where it ends. So I was born in Czechoslovakia. I lived in a town of about 5,000 people. Czechoslovakia was a democratic country. Jews had 20 golden years in Czechoslovakia from 1919 till 1939. Hitler demanded part of my country. It was called a Munich Conference. Our Czechoslovakia had a treaty with Great Britain and France. They were supposed to come to our aid if we are attacked by our neighbor. And so the Prime Minister of Britain and the Prime Minister of France arrived in Munich. Our prime minister, our president, was not even asked to this crucial meeting to my country, President Benesh. My country was simply given away by a stroke of a pen. Not a single bullet was fired. And the country was partitioned into 3 parts. Where I lived, we were given to Hungary. The center part of Czechoslovakia became an autonomous country of Slovakia, a fascist country. And Bohemia and Moravia became the so-called protectorate of the German Reich. So these racial laws, when Hungarians marched in to my part of the world, Eastern Hungary, they brought with them the racial laws, and these racial laws were posted in several places in my town. And we had to go and read it. And there were new laws day by day. The first law was that Jews cannot have a bicycle and a radio. My father had a crystal radio. We had to take it down to town hall. Jews cannot sell alcohol and tobacco. And that hit us hard because my father had a distillery. He was making a drink which is very popular in that part of Europe. It's called Slivovitz. It's made from fruit. And he had a drinking place called the Cellar, where people used to come, have a drink and socialize. And the neighbor simply walked into my father's establishment and he said to him, "Give me your key to your business." And that was it. So 90 Jewish families, most of them were business people, they were farmers. There was a Jewish shoemaker. We had a very nice little Jewish community. We had a rabbi, we had a Hebrew school. We Jews have lived in that part of the world for 1,900 years. When the Romans occupied that part of the world, it was called Pannonia. The Magyars came from Mongolia in the 9th century. And other laws came out that Jews cannot employ non-Jewish people. My mother had a helper. Her name was Anna. She came to live with us when I was born in 1929, and she had to leave. She was my mother's right-hand person. See, we lived in a large home. Many European families lived together as an extended family. So in this large home, it was an L-shaped home with a porch all along the L shape, the inside of the L. My paternal grandparents, they had a daughter, my Aunt Bella, and my uncle and aunt, who they had no children, and my parents and my 2 little brothers. And eventually I had a little sister. She was born in 1943. So after this partition, my maternal family were stuck in Slovakia. And that's where I used to go for my summer holidays. They had a big farm, my uncles and my beautiful cousins. I did that for 3 times. The last time I was there was 9 years. I was 9 years old. Never saw them again after that. So in 1942, we couldn't see them because Jews were not allowed to cross borders from Hungary to Slovakia, which was just a few kilometers away. We were photographed by the order of the police. They wanted to know not only where we lived, but what we looked like. And in 1942, we received a postcard. It had the German eagle on it. And the stamp said Lublin district, and we knew that Lublin was somewhere in Poland. And the message on the other side was, "We, the Friedman family, we are all here together. We are working on farms, and we are awaiting your arrival." 10 or 12 other families received similar postcards. Imagine when the telegram arrived, we were devastated. My mother was devastated, her mother, her siblings, nieces, nephews, they were all gone, simply disappeared. Jews simply disappeared in 1942. And we wanted to believe that they are somewhere waiting for us. I only found out 2 years after I was liberated But what this scheme was, this was part of the deception. When my family arrived and they were taken away to occupy Poland, they arrived in a camp near Lublin called Majdanek. And before they were marched into the gas chamber, they were forced to write a postcard to their families in Hungary. This is how they were planning eventually how they're going to go after the Hungarian Jews 2 years ahead. So, and not knowing what's happening, everything was censored. We couldn't get the real story. We didn't know. And all these terrible things happened from us, where I lived, to occupy Poland, and Auschwitz was about 300 kilometers, and we had no idea what was going on there. So a law came out that every Jewish man from 18 to 45 had to report to Labour Battalions. So out of the 90 breadwinners in my town, I would say 99% were gone. My father, my uncle, young single man, and they were allowed to come home. They were gone. This was a 3-year stint. We Hungarian Jews were living under this fascist system for almost 5 years. We were not put into ghettos like Polish Jews were. And we had to wear a yellow star eventually. Hungarian teachers replaced the Slovak teachers. They brought with them this terrible hatred of Jews. We had to wear a yellow star, and I remember coming to school that morning. We Jewish kids were less than 10% of the student body. There was a huge fight, and we had to endure a lot of harassment and beating and bloody noses. We fought, and nobody could help us, and we had to go to school. The teachers segregated us in the classroom, in the last row of the classroom, and I was 12 and a half years old. We Jewish kids were thrown out of school. So my mother, in her wisdom, she took me away to the capital city of our province, which is the largest city in Slovakia, in the Slovak Republic today. In Slovak, it's called Košice. In Hungarian, it was called Kassa. And I became an apprentice in a fur shop. So while my father is away for 3 years, my grandfather was really the head of the family. My grandfather was an amazing man. He was truly a man of the land. He was a big, strong man. He ran a lumber yard on our property, and I was his helper. He taught me skills. I knew how to prune and graft trees when I was 9 years old. He gave me tasks to do, and he always said to me that no matter what I'm going to do, I have to be the best at it. So he was a man, and of course my mother was my guardian angel, and everybody helped me grow up with different skills. And thinking back, it seems to me like they prepared me a map to travel by. So it was wonderful to have my grandfather. He was a non-commissioned officer in the First World War. He fought in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was in the cavalry. He was a horseman. He knew animals. And I never saw this uniform. I didn't know until the day of March the 15th, 1939, when my grandfather asked me to follow him up to our attic on a very long ladder. And we brought this trunk down, and we opened this trunk, and there was a uniform of a cavalry officer. He took this out because that wasn't a popular thing under the Czechs, of course, And now he took it all out and was cleaned and polished and stitched and all that. So, and my uncles on my mother's side, they were farmers, strapping guys. In 1943, my Aunt Bella died. I think she suffered from polio, and I remembered her sitting on her lap since I was a baby, I guess. She was reading books. She taught me how to read. I was 6 years old. I finished all the books of Jules Verne. I was an avid reader, and she taught all of us, my youngest brother, not my third brother. So she died, and it was the first member of my family that passed away, and I was in shock, and the body was prepared at home. There was no such thing as a funeral parlor, and the casket was made from my grandfather's lumber yard, and she was buried in the cemetery. So the only one out of almost 70 to 75 people who was buried as a normal person should be buried, because the rest of them were all murdered, gassed, and their ashes have been blown to the four corners of the globe. And in 1943, my mother gave birth to a little girl. Her name was Judith. So there were three of us boys, and this beautiful little thing arrived. And I think back, that was truly, she was 14 years younger than I was. I remember my mother had a very difficult birth. And to have a child born in 1943 in the middle of the war was truly a big, big deal. So she had to bear the brunt of raising a baby. So, and I'm thinking of Aunt Bella, so there was death and birth. It was truly a gift from God that he took her away in 43, because I cannot think of how he would have dealt with an invalid the next year. So in 1944 was the last year of the war. We were celebrating Passover in April the 14th, I believe it was, or the 15th, 1944. It was a Friday night, it was a Sabbath, and Passover. It's a holiday when we tell the story of the exodus of the ancient Israelites from slavery to freedom. All these delicious foods were made. We didn't lack any food. We had chickens, geese, and ducks. We had vegetables. We had the only thing we had to buy in the store were spices. We were self-sufficient in all food. And we sat around the table and we told the story of the Exodus and the baby in a crib. This was the last supper truly for the Eisen family, never to be repeated again, and for hundreds of thousands of Jewish families in Europe. So let me backtrack to 1939. War broke out. Poland was attacked. Poland had 3.5 million Jewish people. They were put into ghettos, Warsaw, Lodz, Krakow, many others, huge ghettos. 500,000 people in the ghetto, 750,000 people. It was starving and starvation and all that sort of thing. And we didn't know in Hungary what was happening. So, 1941, Germany attacked the Soviet Union, and there lived about 4.5 to 5 million Jews. And I guess everybody's asking why were these death chambers built in occupied Poland, because this is where the majority of Jews were living. So the Polish Jews were the first ones to be, the ghettos were being liquidated. And that meant that transports were taking them from Warsaw to Treblinka, 2 hours away. In 1941, when the Soviet Union was attacked, millions of army units of the Nazis, SS, and Wehrmacht, divisions and divisions attacked the Soviet Union, followed by special killing units called Einsatzgruppen, where they, These Einsatzgruppen were volunteers, SS units. They were asked that they cannot take any pictures. The man in charge of these units and of the armies was the Reichsführer of the army, Heinrich Himmler. And he spoke to these Einsatzgruppen and he said, "You are going to be the biggest heroes of the Reich, but nowhere in the annals of history will be anything written about your heroism, because we need to keep this undercover. If you cannot do this, you can leave." So these killing units were killing Jews as the armies moved through the Soviet Union. Jews were killed in ravines, in Kiev. There was a place called Babi Yar, a forest, in ditches. So this was the first mass killing of Jews in 1941. Father Patrick de Bois, a priest, wrote a book called The Holocaust by Bullets. He spent 7 years in the Ukraine, just the last 20 years or last 15 years. In the Ukraine, Belarus, Ossetia, Transnistria. He simply wanted to find these mass graves of Jews. He was in Toronto. I will never forget when he spoke at a synagogue. And he said that his grandfather was a prisoner from France, and his grandfather was around that part of the world, and he didn't want to tell him what was going on there. So he went and he found mass graves remains of close to 2 million Jews. And he simply wanted to put a plaque that this is a cemetery of Jewish people, because there's no marks on it. He was able to tell the topography of the land, that it was a mass grave. So I remember he was asked in the synagogue, Father de Bois, why did you do this? 7 years you spent there. He says, well, he said, you quoted from Genesis. If you remember the story, Cain and Abel, they were working out in the field. Cain rose up and slew his brother Abel. And God says to Cain, where is your brother Abel? And Cain says, he answers, am I my brother's keeper? Father Patrick de Bois said, I am my brothers and sisters' keeper. And he wanted to go back because he knew that there's many more graves, mass graves. The problem was they wouldn't let him back. So Reichsführer Himmler of the SS told these people, the killers, there's 1 bullet per Jew, 1 Jew per bullet, because bullets are expensive. So this way of killing was too slow, and they came up with a powerful pesticide. And after that, they started to build these huge gas chambers in crematoria in Birkenau, Auschwitz, in Majdanek, in Treblinka, and so on. So January 27, the Russians arrived in Auschwitz, they liberated Auschwitz. And we were delivered from Hungary in 1944, Hungarian Jews. Hungarian Jews were the last pool of Jewish people in Europe. In 1944, 700,000 Jews were living in Hungary at that time. And 450,000 Hungarian Jews were murdered in a span of 3 months. We were shipped out in cattle cars. Do you think that Hungarians could have protected us? The Soviet army entered Hungary about 4 months after we were deported. I'm sure they could have protected us. There was no will to do it. So this is what bodies look like when the Russian troops arrived. These are skeletons. Many of these did not make it, even though they were liberated. The irony of it was that we were dying from starvation. And then when they gave us food, when you were in this condition, food killed us. We couldn't retain food. And so it was a real big dilemma. And this SS man, he stripped of all his insignia. He was found a truckload of bodies, somebody's children. They still have their civilian clothing. Jewish life wasn't worth a plugged nickel in Europe. So we were taken away the next morning, Passover. Two gendarmes broke into our home. They kicked in the doors and they were yelling and screaming that you have 2 minutes to pack a bundle, we are taking you away. So what do you do when this happens to you? This is truly a rude awakening. My mother, she was a very practical lady. She told us, put on layers of clothing right away. My father told me to put my boots on. We had custom-made winter boots. You know, boots are very important. And my father being in a Labour Battalion for years, and boots were very important. And he went into the quarters of my grandparents to see how they were doing. My grandfather was 77 years old. My grandmother was 75. In this commotion, a neighbor comes running in to our home. The gendarmes were yelling at her to get out of here. This is not your business. Her husband was an official in town. She was a good friend of my mother and my aunt, and her son and I, we were in the same classroom. You see, it was when this change came, when Hungarians came into our town, people with whom we have lived with for generations, we did business with them, we helped each other. We had a wonderful relationship, but when this system came in, this fascist system, anti-Semitism and hatred, and the true colors sort of arrived, and it was shown by people, but not everybody. So this lady, Ili Klinka, she goes up to my mother and she said to her, Ethel, where are you taking this baby? Why don't you leave the baby with me? And I think back, I cannot imagine that in 44, we have no idea what is going on in occupied Poland. A terrible thing. I live with this and I cannot imagine how this could have happened. You know, today you can send good or bad messages across the globe in a matter of seconds. So we were removed forcibly from our home, and 500 Jews were put into the schoolhouse, into 250 Jews per room, 2 rooms, and we spent the second night of Passover in the school, guarded by Hungarian gendarmes. It was a terrible night. So imagine 10% of the population of my town are sealed off. So is the town going on about their normal business? They go to the pub, they go to the baker, or to the butcher. What's going on, you know? Imagine in front of 3 million people, and the 300,000 would be closed in somewhere downtown in the football field, and would anybody be thinking of what's going on there? Do they need help? So when I came back, Ili Klinka told me, I was incarcerated for 1 year, almost to the day. But you know that 1 year as a slave laborer under the Nazis was like 1,000,000 years. A second in Auschwitz was like 1,000 years. So she told me what happened. While we were in the school, our neighbors ransacked every Jewish home to the bare walls. The synagogue, there was a beautiful synagogue. 80% of the town's population were Roman Catholic, 10% were Protestant, 10% Jews. So there was a Catholic church, a Protestant church, and a synagogue. The synagogue was desecrated, the prayer books and the Talmudic books were burned in fires, and the ark was, the scriptures were taken out of the ark and cut into ribbons and words. This is what happened in my town. Heinrich Heine, a German poet who happened to be Jewish, some hundreds of years ago, wrote that those people that burn books will eventually burn people. So we were The next morning, 500 Jews were assembled in the schoolyard. And this was done by Hungarian gendarmes. Mothers were not allowed to have their carriage. Can you imagine? My mother was holding a baby in her one arm, clothing for the baby, I don't know, diapers or what have you, I don't know, in the other arm, and she carried some dishes and pots or pans and a sheet on her back. I never was able to ask my mother, I really have a talk with her. That was very upsetting. She had to worry about how she was going to take care of the family. Mothers were breastfeeding babies. There was no such thing as formula. The rabbi, who was an elderly gentleman, was made to walk in front of the column. The irony of it, that the night before we were reading the Exodus from Israel, from Egypt to the Israelites, and here we were being walked from our homes into the unknown. Walking through the town, they were spitting and yelling at us. Everybody did that, and we were walked by our property. It was a closed property. We had a big fence around our property. We had a big Alsatian, whose name was Farkas, in Hungarian means a wolf, and he knew. He had such an instinct, he had such an acute smell. He knew that we were in this column of people walking by. And I remember his barking. He was sort of whining, like he was crying his heart out. And for a whole year, I was thinking of Farkas, that I want to get back home. Maybe there will be some way, somehow I'll meet him again. Because the rest of the town, they had no heart. And we were delivered in a brickyard where we spent 3 weeks. And the SS man arrived every day, and he told us a deception, a lie, that you're going to be resettled in the East. You'll be working on farms, and families will be together. And I kept thinking that I'll meet up with my beautiful cousins from Slovakia, who were deported in 1943. So my Iliklinka saved several pictures, and this is one picture. And I just want you to look at the map of continental Europe. In 1942, Nazi Germany ruled all over this territory. They were at the apex of their glory. They called it Festung Europa, Fortress Europe. Canadians, Americans, Australians came to do away with this evil. So look at this map. Trains, locomotives were pulling millions of Jews to their death in occupied Poland. From Brussels, from Berlin, from Bratislava, from Budapest, from Bucharest, from Paris, Rome, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, all the way south in Greece. Millions of Jews and miserable human cargo, they were locked into cattle cars. And not a single sabotage happened to any rail tracks. People were simply standing by and watched things happen. You could smell these transports when they were on railroad sidings. Initially, they gave us a pail of water and a pail for the toilet. Imagine to be locked up in a box for 4 days. That's how long it took us. Jews from Greece, it took them a month to arrive. When the doors were open on the platform in Auschwitz, most of them were dead. I think I'm going the wrong way here, sorry. And this is a picture was taken in 1940 by the order of the police. My beautiful mother and my father was a businessman, and my 2 younger brothers. Everybody knew that Eugene was 5 years younger than I. He had a very high IQ, that he would be really something. You know, there were 6 million Jews murdered, including 1.5 million Jewish children. The Nazis knew that if you kill the children, you kill an entire nation. These children whose wings were not allowed to spread, whose talents had been lost to the world. I was just thinking of Anne Frank. What an amazing teenager. She wrote this diary. She died 2 weeks before in Bergen-Belsen, before liberation. But she survived. She will be the same age as I, 92 years old. Imagine how many books she could have written by now. So this is where we arrived after 4 days in a kettle car such as this. Some of them had a little opening, maybe 2 slats with metal bars. And this was in May. The heat was building up. The doors were never open. People went berserk. You couldn't sit down. You were stuck like sardines in a can. I keep thinking my mother holding a baby in her arm and other mothers. These babies could not be fed. My mother had no milk, I imagine. These babies were wilting away. And this is in Birkenau, the death camp. You can see the cement pylons of wire, the electrified wires. This is the main track. You enter this building. This is Auschwitz-Birkenau 2. This is a huge guardhouse on top. The window that was bristling with machine guns and searchlights. This is the main track. For Hungarian Jews, they built 2 extra tracks, track 2 and 3, because Hungarian Jews were brought here 24/7. And this is where I arrived. This is Birkenau, the death camp and partial labor camp. My father and I were selected out, and we were taken to a barrack. They took away our clothes. The only thing we're allowed to keep were our boots. And the next stage was they cut our hair, and then we put through a shower and into a wooden barrack with triple-tier bunks. That's the first time I saw construction like that. But it was absolutely wonderful to be able to lie down on wooden planks after standing for 4 days on my feet. And May the 8th, we brought out, and it was a beautiful sunny morning. I thought it was some kind of a big industrial zone. There was a terrible smell in the air, like burning flesh. And I turned around and I could see 4 huge chimneys. These are the gas chambers and crematoria, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And this is the smoke where Hungarian Jews were being burned. So we were naked. And I could see emaciated people behind barbed wire fences. And 2 men in their striped outfits. And I kept thinking, what am I doing here? These are killers who did something bad. And I knew that people who did something bad, they're sent away in jail and they wear striped outfits. And they brought us a ladle of water. My father asked them, are we going to see our families today? And see, on that platform, it was masterful deception. They said, you're going for disinfection, you're going for the shower. And you will see your families after all. And you don't need your bundles, we'll have your bundles delivered. Everything had a reason why they did all these things. They had it all figured out ahead of time. Everything clicked with precision on these transports as they arrived, because Hungarian transports were coming nonstop. I'll tell you about a German sergeant who was in Auschwitz. His name was Oscar Gröning. He was up for trial. I went to his trial. He was being charged with the murder of 300,000 Hungarian Jews. So my father asked these men in the striped outfits, are we going to see our families today? And they were laughing. They said, where did you come from? So my father said, we came from Hungary in the middle of the night. He said, in 1944, you don't know what this place is all about? Your families have gone to the chimney. This was the lingo. here you die of bleeding or starvation, gas. You go to the chimney. The sign was like this with the finger. You're going up in smoke. And I couldn't figure out why would a person go through the chimney. I found out by the end of the day. I knew what happened. You know, how do you get acclimatized? You see, reality was one thing, and then this was an unreal world, and you had to keep on going, and we knew that our families were gone. Can you imagine to think about that? And we can't speak about it because it would be very upsetting. Because here, every step was like stepping in a minefield. And here you arrive in Auschwitz I, brick buildings, two-story brick buildings. These are military barracks of the Polish army. There were some 30,000, 28 to 30,000 slave laborers here. And it says, Arbeit macht frei. This is part of the deception. Work will set you free. And I spent 9 months in this camp. This camp was, in many ways, it was better than the other camps. The other camps were all wooden barracks. Here, being military barracks, we had indoor plumbing, and it was a big bonus. So we were working a work detail. In July, there was a big selection. The selection started in the middle of the night. We could see the bombing in June of 44. Hundreds of American planes were overhead, and they were bombing some huge factories that were building in Auschwitz III. Monowitz, the IG Farben, this huge conglomerate, was building synthetic rubber and synthetic oil plant. They were bombing at the smithereens. And boy, that was a happy moment. I said, keep bombing. You know, we didn't care if we get killed. Shrapnel was flying. And so selection started, and it went on like this. You come back from your work, you're deadbeat. You're a slave laborer. And you have your striped outfit, you have a cap, a jacket, your pants, and you're lucky to have your boots, because if you don't have your boots, you get a pair of wooden clogs. And here, all of a sudden, everybody wants to steal your good boots. You have to take care of your boots, because without those boots, you are in big trouble. All these things are new, and you have to get you really have to learn to be a fast learner here. And our diet was 300 calories a day, and our body was fast disappearing right in front of your eyes. And the work we had to do, we had bruises and cuts, and you couldn't run and say you can't work. There was no such thing. You had no toilet paper. You had a cup of water in the morning. On this, you work till lunch, a ladle of stinking soup. And on this, you work till about 7. You were marched back to camp, and you received your dinner, which was a cup of Ajax coffee, a thin slice of bread, and a tiny square of margarine. They had systematically figured out that your lifespan here would be no more than 3 months. And now the Americans are coming from the west, the Red Army is coming from the east, so they don't need any more workers. The big factories are gearing down, they're shipping their equipment back to the fatherland, to the Reich. And in the middle of the night, the loudspeakers go on, powerful loudspeakers. It says, Achtung, Achtung, attention, attention. All the inmates from these barracks go naked to barrack such and such for selection. And my father and uncle were selected out. I went in the morning to the barrack, and they were not there. I had to line up for counts and go to work and come back. Now, can you imagine this picture? Looks very benign. But on a working day here, this is bristling with SS guards and their head dogs, Dobermans and shepherds. There's a men's orchestra playing music. Once the count is right, imagine counting 30,000 people. On a good day, it was about an hour and a half. But if the figure if they couldn't get the total figure, you could stand there for 3 to 4 hours. People were dropping dead, standing in a military fashion. It was brutal just to stand under the sun or under freezing weather, and all you have is no protection. And so I realized that my father was selected out, and in part of this camp, there were 2 or 3 barracks were fenced off and became a quarantine area. And I ran there, and I was looking at people, and I was yelling the name of my father and my uncle. And we somehow connected, and my father came to the fence, and it was not far from a guard tower, and there was a tripwire, and if you cross the tripwire, the guard could shoot you. And the guard yelled at me, if I don't move, he'll shoot. My father gave me a blessing, and he told me that if I managed to survive, I had to tell the world what happened here.
Thank you, Max. I hate to interrupt, but I do want to leave a few minutes for questions, and we've had quite a few come in.
Okay.
So the first question is from Daryl and Louise. They say, hi, Max. Hello, and so nice to see you are doing well. We traveled to Poland with you in 2010 for the March for the Living. And their question is, regarding recent racist and anti-Semitic activities in Washington, D.C., do you see any similarities between these activities and those during the early years of Hitler?
Yes. It is terrible what I see. You know, I've been speaking for 30 years now, and there are many things that started to happen in Canada. Swastikas and cemeteries and the homes of survivors, this BDS movement. Jewish students have a very difficult time in universities in Canada. You see, the irony of it is, Lord Rabbi Jonathan Saxon was a very famous rabbi, a lord, who said that anti-Semitism is like a virus that keeps mutating. In the Middle Ages, they hated the Jews because of our religion. In the 19th and 20th century, they hated us because of our race. And today, this BDS movement is a movement against Israel. Boycott, divest, and sanctions. Dismantle Israel, a democratic country. In Canada, they're doing this in a democratic country in Canada. So, and this to me is a big threat, a big danger signal. So, they keep saying that we're not anti-Semites, we are anti-Zionists. Anti-Zionism is the new anti-Semitism today. And it's well and alive, and I hate to tell you this, but you know, this is what it is, and we need to listen, and we cannot overlook this, because I know how this works. It starts with words and it ends in a horrible place. And if everybody does not step up, you know, and say we cannot allow this to happen, we can lose our freedom and our way of life in this country. This is a proven fact. This is what happened in Nazi Germany. And you can imagine, in the most cultured country in Europe, Nazi Germany was. So I'm very concerned. And this is not a Jewish problem, it is everybody's problem. And we cannot afford to be bystanders. That's all I can tell you, that this is really, really for real. I've been warning people 15, 20 years ago what's coming, what I saw. And I was told that, you know, are you sure, Max? You know, I spoke to a rabbi in the largest synagogue in Toronto. I says, come on, Max, things are that bad. I said, you know, my gut's telling me that this is leading to a bad thing. I said, yeah, that's what I feel. I said, we need to wake up our community and be aware of what is going on. They said, well, okay, I'll speak to my colleagues and I'll get back to you. I never heard from them. And this is exactly what happened to Jews in Europe. You see, it's very difficult. You live with a problem and it gets worse and worse. It's like, who feeds the alligator, you know, feed them the longer, you know, so you have an extra day. But it's terrible for us survivors to see this. And combined with this writer's business, there's three things that are coming. I know everybody's feeling really bad. I mean, everybody feels locked in. And we who know what it means, losing freedom, we need to be aware and we need to act. There is such a thing called IRA, a document that was from the United Nations, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And there's always a saying after the Second World War, never again. And I hope that they mean it never again. Because just think that the war was finished, the world was celebrating, there was nothing for the Jewish community to celebrate. We were totally wiped out in continental Europe. We were homeless and families were gone. And for me to see this and for people to experience the same thing, I cannot live with that, And this is why I've been talking for many, many years.
Yes.
And warning people.
Sorry. Our second question is, after going through such a terrible ordeal, how do you feel about the Nazis? Do you feel forgiveness? Do you feel hatred? And how do you live with such a great burden?
Well, it's a burden. It's true. I will never forget it. I'll tell you, I've Nazis, if I see I don't think there are too many around. I'm 92, but if I see somebody who's older than I would be wondering what he was doing during the war. Other generations, younger generations, they had no part in this. But I cannot forgive. I cannot forgive for the millions of people that were so brutally murdered. I think of my mother ending her life at 40 with 3 of her kids, of her children, in a gas chamber with 2,000 people. Who could have thought up such a terrible way of killing people, 2,000 people in a gas chamber? I will live with this for as long as I live, and this is the most upsetting thing for me. And many other people live with the same feelings. So I say that everybody deserves his day in court, like Oscar Gröning. They were 94 years old. They were brought to court in Germany. In Germany, you cannot say that the Holocaust didn't happen. You can say it here in Canada. You go to jail. So, I have relations. I like to speak to people and eye to eye, and I feel, is there a chemistry? Is there a vibe? And I think it's very important. There's a lot of hate, and it's because of people are not connecting with each other, perhaps. And I think in our schools, what we need to teach our children from kindergarten up to respect others, to respect. And there's little respect today. There's such hatred going on, people to people.
Yes.
So this is where I'm at with it.
So our next question is, were you concerned that something else was happening when the camp was being liberated?
When the camp was being liberated, I was almost done. I was suffering from typhus. Somebody shuffled into my barrack. I was in a camp called Ebensee, not far from Salzburg, in the beautiful Alpine Mountains. This tank unit was called a 761st Black Panther Tank Battalion. I was in the lower bunk, and if you read my book, the conditions were absolutely horrible. I was sort of on my last leg, hanging by a thread, and this man shuffled in his wooden clogs on the cement floor. I mean, imagine a skeleton who can't lift his feet off the ground. He pushes the clogs, And he's mumbling away that the guards are no longer in the tower. Imagine, the guard is not in the tower. This bucket helmet with the SS runes sitting with a machine gun. And I said, if I don't climb out of this bunk, I will never make it. There were cadavers all over the place. People fell down and they were dead on the floor. And I crawled out and I could see that the tower was empty. And seconds later, the gate came crashing in. It was a big tank coming through with a white star. And there were black soldiers sitting on the turret. I will never forget that moment. Never. It was like a mountain lifted off my back. You know, I was liberated, but we were not free. We had a long journey to go after leaving the camp, you know, we had a big package to carry, you know. I don't mean goods, we had nothing, you know, but I was scared to leave the camp 2 months later. I wasn't able to walk. There was an announcement that an army truck is taking whoever is going to Czechoslovakia, so be at the gate tomorrow morning at 8, and here I am going to the truck. There were about 40 kids, and some to Hungary, some. And where am I going? I had nowhere to go. I said, I'm going home. And I knew that nobody will be there. So imagine you come home where it was a living place, living people, a normal life. In 1944, I mean, we had, and you come back and it's a dead city, a dead place. My Alsatian wasn't there, Farkas. A neighbor was sitting in my mother's kitchen who wouldn't give me a glass of water. And I was lucky this lady, Iliklinka, I went to see her. I was in such horrible shape. I had wet pleurisy and I was full of water. I couldn't lay down. I couldn't breathe. And she saw me and she stripped me and she gave me a bath. I was full of lice. I can never forget that. I was so ashamed, you know. And, you know, the Americans, when they liberated us in Ebensee, they had no clothes. They found a huge warehouse of Hitler Youth shirts, the brown shirts of the Hitler Youth and corduroy breeches and boots. And this is what they gave us. So I came back home in a Hitler Youth shirt. I couldn't button it up because I was full of water. My feet were swollen up, retaining water. I was so dirty. Can you imagine coming back to Košice? I got off this train. I got a lift with a Russian troop train. I was ashamed to go out on the streets. You know, I was a pariah. And in spite of all that, you know, you need to go on. You never, ever, ever give up. I could have given up right there and then and say, that's it. And coming back to your home and found one of the fox terriers that we had in the bushes of, we had bushes in the garden, and he wouldn't come out, and it broke my heart. His name was Ali. He was a short terrier. He was full of scabs, and I had to find somebody who was a hunter and ask him to come and shoot him. And that was it. That was the end of my memories to my home. So going back is a terrible thing. I was back at my home last 2 years ago. We're making a documentary, and it's a big scrapyard there now, and it was on a Sunday, so everything was closed out. And I met somebody. We're doing filming, and somebody comes out in a wheelchair and down the road, and he's yelling, Tibor, Tibor, my name is Tibor. And there was a film crew of 10 people. Everybody was, isn't this amazing? Somebody remembers my name. You know, can you imagine? One person. Anyway, we spoke Hungarian. It's my mother tongue. And we invited him for lunch. So I asked him, I said, tell me, what happened here when we were sealed up in the school? What happened here? He said, oh, that was a terrible time. I said, but what happened? What happened to the livestock? What happened to Farkash? Oh, it was a terrible time. I said, well, what happened to my mother's beautiful furniture, her linen and her tapestries and all these things? Oh, it was a terrible time. I was very upset. I couldn't get a straight answer, This is, you should never go back. You can only go forward,
The next question is actually about when you went back to Auschwitz-Birkenau in 1998 with your granddaughter and how that made you feel to visit the concentration and death camp.
I never thought that I ever wanted to go back. I was a very busy businessman and I loved every minute of it. And there's a saying that the third generation asks questions of survivors' families. So here we have our granddaughter, Amy. She was 10 years old. She went to Leo Back School, and she says to me, says, Gramps, I want to go on the March of the Living. I heard about the March of the Living, but I wasn't thinking that way that I need to go back or whatever, I got such a shock. I had a big electric shock when she told me. I said, oh my God. I said, oh. I said, you're 10 years old, when you're 16, well, talk about it. But I tell you, and she was 16, and she signed up, and I said, I can't let her go alone. For me to take kids, it hurts me so much. So they have to go and see these horrible places. I don't want kids to see places like that. And yet they need to see it, This is the dilemma. I was the most devastating time. I can never forget, I told her that this is gas crematoria too, where they were all gassed. I introduced her to her first family. Is that a normal word, So my parents never had a chance to know my wife, their grandchildren, and vice versa. It's not a normal life. So I was so scared for them, and we arrived in Krakow, and beautiful city, and they gave them a half an hour to go, and I said, oh my God, these kids got lost. I just couldn't. I've been back there 30 times with different groups. And that first was really, and I've been going back with teenagers, I go with the Franco Wiesenthal Center with police chiefs, politicians, and different groups. And every time I go back, it is an experience, and I feel the pain, and I watch it, and I just want to speak to people. I see flags from different countries on the day of the March of the Living, whether it's Jewish groups or a group from Japan or the German students. And I tell them, I says, I was here in this camp. I'll never forget that, a bunch of German kids. And, they are innocent. They come to Auschwitz to see what happened. So I was in front of Barrack 21, the surgery. I had a terrible hit by an SS guard. My head was smashed. I lost a lot of blood. I couldn't get up on my feet. I was taken to the surgery in Barrack 21 in Auschwitz. I was operated on by two Polish political prisoners, two doctors who saved my life. And I worked for this Dr. Leszczko for 6 months in the surgery. Um, so I forget now what I was going to say.
Well, we have one final question, and that is, how do you feel about media? So TV shows, movies, and books that romanticize and fictionalize the terrors of the Nazis. So for example, there's a show called Hunters on Amazon Prime. Do you have any thoughts about media that romanticize the Nazis?
Well, it's become a style, swastikas and all these things have become. I'll never forget giving a lecture in a school somewhere in Toronto in a suburb, and I'm standing in front of the blackboard, and the student was sitting in a table and a chair that was screwed to the floor, and he had a carved swastika on the table right in front of me. It was a shock. But this is what happens in some countries. They romanticize this. They open up a bar and they wear swastikas. They get dressed like SS soldiers. I don't know. It's a crazy world, and I feel very bad. I know there was a documentary or a movie called "The Boy in Striped Pajamas." I mean, that is, it's not for real. There's no way you can describe what the place was like. You need to go there, and when you go there, you need to think. You need to feel, smell, and hear the sounds. I'll never forget. I've spoken to so many kids. Milton District High School, amazing school. And I spent with them 2 days to prepare them to go to Auschwitz. You cannot go there unless you're really prepared. And these were grade 10 and 11 students. And they went, and when they came back, one girl was interviewed by a local paper. And she said this, I was so moved by this. We arrived there she said about 7 o'clock in Birkenau. And it was windy. We got off the bus. She said, I could feel ghosts all around me. I wanted to warn them. I wanted to hold them. I simply wanted to know their names. And this is what you see there. You think that you're seeing ghosts. I look at blades of grass as if these people who were so brutally murdered, they're looking at us, And the irony of it, you go back in April to Birkenau or to Majdanek, and the grass is emerald green around the crematorium. Human ashes make amazing fertilizer 70 some odd years later. So I met people from all over the world, and they come with good intentions, and I think everybody should go there. There was a man here in Toronto whose name was Ernest Zundel years ago, and I think he was one that made me decide that I really need to step up and do something. He was a Holocaust denier. He didn't take out Canadian citizenship. He wrote a daily hate sheet. He was hauled into court by a Holocaust survivor, and the case didn't go anywhere because his lawyer, whose name was Doug Christie, he destroyed the witnesses. With questions, he asked the survivor. There was no gas chamber. He said, Ernest Zundel, he says he went to Auschwitz from Toronto for a visit. He said there was a surgery and there was a swimming pool. And I worked in that surgery. And it's true, the surgery was simply a part of the deception the Nazis used. They brought the International Red Cross and showed them, look, we take good care of our people. We didn't have many tools. I mean, we had no blood plasma, we had no intravenous, but very simple things. They wouldn't take the International Red Cross to Birkenau to do that thing. So Ernest Zuno, said it was an R&R place. And you see, this is how people twist. It's like saying, you know, the world is not really round, it's flat. It didn't happen. So, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much to Dr. Max Eisen for sharing your powerful and incredible story and
Thank
your
you.
message of perseverance, hope, and courage with us tonight. I highly encourage everybody to read Max's book, By Chance Alone. And as we mentioned, we have copies at the Ajax Library. It's an incredible story, and he just goes into such detail about his experience. So everybody, please read this book. To watch this event again, please check our website over the next few days and we will be posting the video. And I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us, and good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you, Julia.
Thanks, Max. Good night.
Bye-bye.